Joining me now is Brian Brown. He is the president of the National Organization for Marriage. And the issue of marriage has not gone away with the election because there are a number of court cases that very well could put the whole issue of same-sex marriage and traditional marriage back on the front page of the paper. One of the big issues is Proposition 8 out in California, where a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down Proposition 8, basically saying that the voters of California who voted for Proposition 8 that defined marriage as between a man and a woman, that they were wrong. That 52% of the people of California were wrong, but 3 judges were right. And you wonder, whatever happened to the will of the people? Brian, it's good to have you here on the Mike Huckabee Show today. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Governor Huckabee.
Let's talk about the impact of the court decision, because California had to do this not once but twice in voting on defining marriage in a traditional way. And I always resent it when the media portrays this as anti-gay, because it's not anti-gay. Nobody's saying you can't be gay. It's just saying that marriage is going to be defined as it has historically, and for that matter, biblically been defined as between a man and a woman. And twice voters in California affirmed that, and the courts seem to find that troublesome, and they always look for ways to overturn it. Where does this stand right now?
Well, as you said, the Ninth Circuit ruled against Proposition 8. It basically concocted this new theory that somehow, because the courts in California had forced gay marriage on California and there were same-sex marriages occurring, then you had Proposition 8 pass and that stopped. Justice Reinhardt in the Ninth Circuit said, well, you can't have same-sex marriage and then the people revoke it. The law only goes in one direction, and once it's granted, you can't take it back. So that's now before the Supreme Court today, actually. The court is conferencing on whether to take the case. I'm confident that they will take the case, because this would be an absolute disaster for our Constitution to have this ruling stand. And if the Supreme Court decided not to take the case, then the Ninth Circuit ruling would stand. And I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to take the case. There's also a number of DOMA cases before the court. Those cases have different circuits ruling in different ways. So I think almost everyone agrees on both sides that the court is going to take the DOMA cases. And we believe, we're confident that the court is also going to take the Perry case. And I think ultimately rule in our favor and in favor of the voters of California and the majority of states that have voted to protect marriage, the overwhelming majority, and in favor of the Constitution, as it's clearly written. There is no constitutional right. Our founders did not create some sort of constitutional right to redefine marriage, and I think the court's going to rule that way.
Brian Brown is my guest, president of the National Organization for Marriage. Let me just let our listeners know, if they're not familiar with the lingo, DOMA is the Defense of Marriage Act that we're talking about. And then, of course, the Prop 8 case is the one that would have did define marriage as between the man and the woman. Brian, you said you think the court will take this case up. Is it possible they'll sort of take all of these as one great big consideration? I guess I can't lump cases together in one sense, but there are a number of cases regarding defense of marriage, which is, by the way, something signed by Bill Clinton in 1996 and was a bipartisan act that simply said states could make that decision and the federal government couldn't preempt the states. That shouldn't be that hard if one reads the 10th Amendment, but it seems that it is difficult for a lot of people to understand it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think you're spot on. I think that the court is going to take all of the cases at once, because it makes the most sense to deal with all of these constitutional questions. Of course, the cases are different, but the court can take them at once, and I think that's what's going to happen. The interesting point is proponents of same-sex marriage are arguing two mutually exclusive things. On the attempt to overturn the Defense of Marriage Act, they're arguing that states like Massachusetts that have passed same-sex marriage, that somehow that preempts Congress from defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman, and that because the states define marriage as the union of a man and a woman, the federal government has to recognize that. So they're essentially making a sort of a strange states' rights argument, but they're arguing the federal government and our duly elected representatives, Congress, doesn't have a right to define marriage. On the other hand, they're arguing in the Perry case, the Proposition 8 case, that not only does the federal government have a right to define marriage, there's an obligation in the U.S. Constitution to recognize, to redefine marriage as in same-sex marriage. So, on one hand, they're arguing the U.S. Constitution demands same-sex marriage. It's the federal government that has to redefine marriage throughout the country and overturn all of these laws that have been passed overwhelmingly in these 30 states through constitutional amendments and 10 other states through statute. And in the DOMA case, it's arguing, oh, no, this is a state's issue. So it's trying to argue two different things, and I think that's why taking all of the cases at once will sort of expose a bit of the sort of hypocrisy going on in these two very different and mutually exclusive arguments they're making.
You know, Brian, liberals have never been all that logical or rational in their views. It's based more on the emotion of how I feel, what I think, what I believe, not necessarily what the law says. But you did say something that kind of caught me off guard. You said you thought that the courts would rule in favor of traditional marriage. I hope you're right, and I'd like to believe that's the case, but I've seen this court do some very stupid things, including watching John Roberts go to the dark side and vote for Obamacare. So what gives you confidence that the current makeup of the court would rule in favor of traditional marriage?
Well, the Obamacare decision that you referenced and Roberts' decision to accept that actually, in some ways, bodes well for DOMA because even though we may disagree with the decision, the logic was that Congress has the right to impose this quote unquote tax, basically essentially force Americans each to have health care. Even though there's no history or tradition of this, Roberts argues, well, the court has to give deference to Congress. Well, if the court has to give deference to Congress for this completely new idea of creating of forcing each American to have health care, then what about the traditional and historic understanding of marriage? Of course, the court has to give deference to Congress that it has the right to define marriage as it's always been defined under federal law. So that gives me hope, but also I don't think that Justice Kennedy wants to launch a new cultural war here. I think that if you look at the arguments before passage of Roe versus Wade, many argued that, look, if the court acts here and basically imposes its will, the conversation will end, the folks that oppose abortion just go away, and the fight will be over. That isn't what happened. It short-circuited the democratic process. The court stepped in, and it launched a war that goes to this day. I don't think the court is going to do that on same-sex marriage and essentially short-circuit the democratic process, impose its will. I don't think that Kennedy is going to do that. That's a number of other reasons, but that is a key point in all of this, that the court will be short-circuiting the democratic process, it will be imposing its will, and it will essentially be invalidating 50 millions and millions of votes that have happened in state after state after state. I don't think it's going to do that.
Well, I hope you're right, Brian. I really do, and I appreciate your explanation of it because, I guess I'm not overly confident that the court makes decisions that are based on common sense or even the will of the people. And, 32 states which have had this on the ballot have voted for an affirmation of traditional marriage, but that hasn't seemed to stem the tide. We'll be keeping a close eye on this and want to keep in touch with you. And people, if they want more information, can go to the website nationformarriage.org, nationformarriage.org. And we appreciate Brian Brown from the National Organization for Marriage being here. Brian, thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Governor. You too.